Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Tetzayin. This week's learning is sponsored by Medina Korn in loving memory of her mother, Rosalie Kachin, Shoshana Rezel Bat Abraham Yoshua Vebela Toiba Zichrona Lebracha on her 23rd year at Sai. She continues to teach me so much, even though she's been gone for so long. Yehi Zichra Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by the Ginat family in loving memory of Barak ben Lifa and Shlomit. And today's daf is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen in loving memory of David's mother, Ethel Pedagorsky Geffen, Adina Bat Aryalev on her 19th year at Sai. She, along with her beloved husband, Abe, devoted her life to family and synagogue. Her two sons made Aliyah to Israel, and her daughter spent her professional life in service to the Jewish community. Okay, we're going to get started with our very long daf. As usual, we have a long one. We'll see if we get through the whole thing. So where did we end yesterday? I wanted to do a good review, but I think I'm going to do it really short. What we had, basically we did. How do we know Eved Ivri is acquired with a money? Kesef. We went from there. We dealt with all four types. Remember, there's four types of Eved Ivri. One who is sold by the court as a slave, one who sells himself because of poverty to a Jewish owner, and one who sells himself to a Gentile owner, and the Amayid V'liyah, the female maidservant who is sold by her father to be a slave. We proved where each one we get Kesef. From there, one of the answers was we have a Sachir Gzera Shava. But how do we answer this for the person who doesn't hold by this Gzera Shava? To which we said, right, we had a different answer, but the whole question began, who's the Tana who doesn't hold Sachir? For that, we brought three answers. Most of them were rejected, or at least alternative suggestions were offered that maybe he doesn't hold Sachir. And with that, we got into all these comparisons of what laws that are mentioned by one are true for the other as well. And from where is all that derived? The third one was Rebbe, who had this drasha on im lo yigal be'ela, in the section of the Gentile. It says, and if he's not redeemed by the relatives, or right, anyone who came before, which were the relatives, or he doesn't redeem himself, or also if other people don't redeem him, then, or we're not sure what be'ela was referring to, that was the whole question, but im lo yigal be'ela, then he goes free in the Jubilee year. Now, what we said here is, Be'ela, what does Rebbe say? Be'ela hu nigal, but not b'shesh. Which shows here, because that whole pasuk really wasn't necessary. Of course, he's still a slave, and then of course he goes free in the Jubilee year, because the pasukim right before discussed the Jubilee year issue, which was right if you redeem yourself earlier, you do a calculation until you get to the Jubilee year, because the assumption is you're only sold for the Jubilee year. Now we said, okay, we're going to get to the fact. Someone asked the question after class, and it comes up right at the beginning of today's talk, which is, why is the Gentile listening to our laws? That the Jubilee year lets him go free. The Gentile could say, oh, I don't care about your Jewish law. So we'll get back to that. But right now, that's Rebbe's drasha. Then we said, who disagrees with Rebbe? And we brought Rabbi Yossi Glili and Rabbi Akiva, who all say that Be'ele is actually a pasuk coming to say, wait a minute, there's a limitation here. There's a case where someone might get redeemed and is still going to be a slave. And that's the way they understand it. And then the debate just became, which redemption are you going to still be a slave? Obviously, if you redeem yourself, you're not going to be a slave. The question is, if the relative redeems you, you're going to be a slave, or if someone else redeems you, you're going to still remain a slave. Okay, to them, you'll be enslaved to whoever redeemed you. And then we have this, what's the machloka based on? Is it based on the psukim? Or perhaps it's at the end, they say it's really based on logic. Okay, and that's where we ended yesterday. So now we're going to start 6 lines from the bottom of Tefaf and Mepeh. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, I will say these dapim are very complicated. If you have time, I know most people, when you're doing Daf Yomi, you don't have time to go over it more, but it is recommended if you just review the daf 1 or 2 more times. Again, you could review it in different ways. The study guide will help you also if you just wanted to give a quick glance over the daf, or listening again, or somehow reading it over again. It will make a lot more sense the second, the third time you go through it. Again, you might not have the time, and then have to take out of it what you take. That's why I keep reviewing, so at least you get the basic ideas here. Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Zo divrei Rabbi Yossi Glili Rabbi Akiva. This whole thing where we made an assumption that there's one case. Remember, we also had this thing about the pasuk being nidrash before or being nidrash after. We had the list of 3, the relative, and then yourself, and then someone else redeems you. And then the question is, right, which one is more similar to yourself, which means you're going to be free, and which one is not. So this whole thing that one case you're going to still be enslaved and the other case you won't be, Well, again, you won't be enslaved to the Gentile owner, you'll be enslaved to whoever redeemed you. That's Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva, and they have a disagreement about which one. But the rabbis say, if anybody redeems you from this Gentile owner, you're free. You're not working for them. You're not a slave to them. And Man Chachamim, who is this? Rebbe. It's obviously Rebbe. Why? Because Rebbe used the Be'ela Pasuk not to say that you're still going to be a slave. He used the Eila Pasuk to say, you're redeemed in Yovel, you're redeemed if someone redeems you, but you're not redeemed if 6 years pass, right? And that was Rebbe's whole drasha there. Had nothing to do with what's your status once someone redeems you. He uses Be'ela for a different drasha. Umakish, and in the pasuk about the three characters, the ben dodo, the relative, himself, and the someone else. Well, what's he going to do with that? He says basically the middle case is teaching you both about the case after it and about the case before it, and that's Rebbe. The Rebbe. Now, what do we have to deal with Rebbe then? So Be'ela means if you're not redeemed in these ways, meaning you're only redeemed this way, meaning by relatives, but you're not redeemed just because 6 years pass, okay? And Eved Ivri who is enslaved to a Gentile doesn't have this 6 year, you go free in the 7th year. Well, the continuation of that pasuk, if you don't leave in these years, you will leave in the Shnata Yovel, my Avidle. What does he do with those words? That you're only going to leave in the Jubilee year? Of course, only you're going to leave in the Jubilee. Look at the pasuk. The pasuk is saying, if you don't get redeemed, well, then you're a slave. And obviously, all the rules of slaves apply to you, which means you go out in the Jubilee year. That's the rule of slaves, because you don't leave in 6 years. You go in the Jubilee year, so why do you need to tell us this? It seems totally unnecessary. It's obvious you leave in the Jubilee year. And again, I mentioned that the Pesukim before talk about how if you get redeemed, it all goes calculated based on the Jubilee year, because it's obvious you're going to leave in the Jubilee year. So, you need it for the following brighta. V'yatsa b'shnat yovel be'ovei kochavim she'eshno tachat yadcha. O eno ela be'ovei kochavim she'eno tachat yadcha. When it says you go out in the Yovel year, is this talking about an Ovei Kochavim that is under your jurisdiction, or is it not an Ovei Kochavim that's under your jurisdiction? Now, what do we mean by this? So Rashi says here, okay, first, let's imagine, we talked about this after class yesterday, so now I'll talk about in class, which is if you're living in, let's say, the state of Israel, and the state of Israel, let's say, goes by all their laws by Mishpat Ivri. Okay, they have Jewish law. The law of the land is Jewish law. And there's Gentiles living in the land of Israel, as we know. So that would mean that if you have Gentiles living in the land of Israel, and they keep the law of the land of Israel, which happens to be Mishpat Ivri, right, Jewish law, then they would have to keep this law. They would buy a slave. The rules would be the slave goes free in the Jubilee year. And what the question here is, maybe it's talking about also a Gentile that's not under your jurisdiction, to which the Gemara says, Amar tavachima shalah satlo. You can't start, if you live in Canada, you can't say, we're going to insist that this Gentile you sold yourself to a Gentile slave, we're going to make the Gentile keep Jewish law. Who on earth is going to listen to you to do that? So, of course, it's not talking about that. It's obviously talking about a case where the Gentile is under your domain. Now, what is it teaching you? Now, here's a great, really important message, ethical message. Rashi says there, if you look on Tevav Amud Bet, this is to teach you. Why does it say, so if again, you sold yourself to a Gentile slave. The pasuk says, if no one redeems you, you leave in the Yovel year. Now, obviously, you leave in the Yovel year. What else would you think? Well, you might think, listen, if the Ovei Kochavim is in my country and I could do whatever I want, well, maybe you would think, right? The law is you're enslaved to him until the Jubilee year. It's a very important ethical message. You are not allowed to try to use subterfuge and try to get out of it and try to say, oh, look, this is my land. I could just, tweak things a little so that I can go free. In other words, it's very interesting. There's this obvious value in the Torah that we don't want you to be enslaved by a Gentile because it's hard to keep Jewish, it's hard to keep kosher, it's hard, all sorts of things. It's hard to do mitzvot, but there's a way legally to get out of it, which is pay your way out, have someone else pay your way out. But if that doesn't work, you're enslaved to him. Don't try to use some other method and go in some other way and try to say, oh, listen, I'm free, and bend the law. No, there's a law and you have to keep it. Okay, that's a really important message. So now we finished that section. We're done with kesef. That was all we got to. How do we know an eved ivri is acquired with money? Now an eved ivri is also required, according to the Mishnah, by shtar. We're basically going through the Mishnah step by step. We're going to get to all the parts of the Mishnah today. So the next one is shtar, with a document. You can be acquired with a document. Minalam, where do we get this from? Amar ula, amar kra, im acheret yikachu. These are the psukim where we have an ama ivriya is sold to be a slave by her father. If the master decides to marry her or marry her son off to her, specifically the son, it says there, then it says, im acheret yikachlo, if he takes another wife, she'erak sutav onata lo yikara. He still has to give her the basic needs. This is where we learn she'erak suta nona, the three things that a husband has to give to his wife. So if he marries someone else, he can't mistreat this woman. She started off as a slave. Maybe you'd think, he's going to mistreat her. He is not allowed to do that. So now, what do we learn from this? What does this have to do with shtar? Well, he kisha katuv la'acheret. She is compared to another woman. Now, how did he marry this other woman? The way you marry normally women. Shtar, kesef, and bi'ah, right? So, ma'acheret miknia b'shtar, just like another woman is acquired with a document, afamai v'chaya miknia b'shtar. So basically, she could be acquired with a shtar, just like another woman. We learn it from this comparison, the pasuk of her to a woman who he marries. But wait a minute. This is only going to work if the shtar that we're talking about is like a shtar of Kiddushin. Like in what way? Well, normally, and we had this whole discussion already, let's talk about a shtar of Kiddushin. Who writes the shtar Kiddushin? The husband. The husband is the one who's acquiring the wife. Normally in a sale, who writes the document? The seller, not the buyer. In the case of Kiddushin, it's the buyer, so to speak. Again, he's not a buyer, but if we're going to just put it into those simple terms of, who's getting something and who's giving something, it's the gainer, the one who gets and not the one who gives. But a normal document is written by the one who's giving it. So if you want to compare and say it's like a shtar Kiddushin, right? We're going to learn it from Kiddushin, then it would have to be that the shtar, when the father sells the daughter to be a slave to this man, who writes the document? The owner, right? The one who's getting her and not the one who's giving her. So we're going to see in a minute that there's a machloket about this. So hani chalamanda amal, this works very well if you say shtar amai v'rea adon kotvo, that the master writes bitcha knuya li, right? Your daughter is acquired to me. But lemanda amar, but the one who holds av kotvo, the father writes it, and that it's more like a regular sale where the seller says, I'm giving you, right? He writes, I'm giving you my daughter. Well, then it's not at all like a Kiddushin shtar, and then you can't learn it from Kiddushin because it's so different from Kiddushin. So, ma'i kalamemer, how are you going to learn the shtar? So basically what we're going to have is two paths. One path is if you hold the master writes the shtar, then we can compare it to shtar Kiddushin, and you can learn it from im acheret yikachlo, and there's this hekesh, this juxtaposition of her and another woman getting married to this guy. So we'll say, just like the woman getting married can do it with a shtar, she can also go in and get sold to him with a shtar. But if you go the other path, it's not going to work. And you're going to need a different proof. The itmar. Now they're just giving you the back. It was said, here's the machloket. Shtar mai v'lea mi kotvo. Here's the basic machloket. Who writes the shtar? Rav Huna amar adon kotvo. Rav Chisda amar av kotvo. So Rav Huna said the master. He's the one who it works perfectly well for. Rav Chisda says the father writes it, which means you can't learn it out from a shtar Kiddushin that the husband writes. So Hani Chala Rav Huna, they're just spelling it out now. So for Rav Huna, this all makes sense. Ela Rav Chisda ma'ikal memer, but how are you going to explain it according to Rav Chisda? So for Rav Chisda, we're going to need a different proof. So we have proof number one works for Rav Huna. Proof number two is going to be for Rav Chisda. Amar Bachar Yaakov Amar Kra Lo Tetzei Ketzei Tavadim. It says in the section about the Samai V'Riyah, she doesn't go out the way other slaves go out. And what are we talking about? Other slaves? Eved Knani. How does an Eved Knani go out? I brought this pasuk on your sheet. You can look at it if you want. There's a pasuk in the same chapter in Shemot, but later on in the chapter where it says that if a slave, if you break his tooth, his eye, I don't remember all the words exactly. I don't have it in front of me right now. But if you injure him, he goes free. Okay. Now she doesn't leave like the Avadim leave. That's the simple reading of that pasuk. Well, what's the drasha on the pasuk? meaning, right? So we learned this already, that an Eved Ivri, right? I think we did this already, that an Eved Ivri doesn't leave if you knock out his eye, okay? So, my Brea also. But the drasha is, Aval niknetu kikinyan avadim. Now they're reading the pasuk very differently, with a focus on, she doesn't go out like avadim go out, but she goes in like avadim go in. And avadim, okay, now you have to get the background here. We're going to see this later. Again, avadim here, we mean Canaanite slaves, which we haven't yet gotten to in the Mishnah. The Mishnah down the road is going to say, Eved Knani is acquired, right? After we finish with Eved Ivri, we're going to move to Eved Knani. How are they acquired? Now, pay attention. Kesef, money. Okay, so that already we have a proof for. So we don't need this pasuk to teach you that. Shtar, which is what we're looking for. So now we're going to say, just like an Eved Knani is acquired with a shtar, Lo tetzeket avadim, she doesn't go out like avadim, but she does come in like avadim. She can be acquired like avadim, which means shtar. Okay, that's very good, but I didn't finish my sentence before. There's 3 ways an Eved Knani is acquired: money, shtar, and chazaka. Chazaka means when it's land, let's say, you work the land. If it's a slave, you start working the slave, right? And nobody comes over and says, hey, that's my slave. Why is he working for you? That's chazaka, where you show ownership by action. So right now they're going to say, which one? So we said not money because we already proved money. It must be shtar. So now the Gemara asks the obvious question. Maybe we say chazaka. Because again, this pasuk, now again, we're going to keep going back to this. This pasuk, lo tetzei avadim, which implies, but she comes in like avadim, is including something additional. But they're going to say not chazaka because there's a pasuk that's an exclusionary pasuk. What is that? Amar Kra. It's the exact opposite of this one. When you have Canaanite slaves, you pass them on by inheritance to your children. What does it say? Instead of hitnachaltem libnechem, you pass them on. It says hitnachaltem otam, them. That's an extra word. You could have said the pasuk without. What do you learn here? Otam b'chazaka v'lo acher b'chazaka. They are acquired, because it's all talking about passing on, you're acquiring of them. They're acquired in a way that others aren't acquired, which means they're acquired by chazaka, and Eved Ivri, or Ama Ivriya, is not acquired by chazaka. I forgot to mention one important point. We wanted to know the laws. When we learned the laws of Kesef, remember we started with the Gentile, the one who sold to a Gentile, and then we had to say, well, what about the Ama Ivriya, and what about the Eved Ivri who sells himself, and what about the one who's sold by the court, right? And we had to go through each one separately. At this point, based on the previous, all we had to prove was the Ama Ivriya. Why? Once we have the pasuk by Ama Ivriya that she gets, right, which either through a Chisda or a Huna's explanation, both are learning from pasukim of the Ama Ivriya, we can learn to all the others, because Dvarim Tevav says, Ki macher lecha achicha ha'ivri o ha'ivriya. So it's true for the Ivriya, it's true for the Ivri, who is sold by the court. Once we have the one who's sold by the court, it says Sachir there, and it says Sachir in the other 2 sections as well, by the Gentile, the one sold by a Gentile, and the one who sells himself out of poverty. So once we have one, we can then easily learn all 4 based on all the hard work we did in the previous step. Okay, so that's now we have this issue. So we include shtar from one pasuk and we exclude chazaka from the other pasuk. Now in a minute we're going to say, but that's pretty arbitrary. Why don't we do the reverse? Okay, because all we really have is one pasuk is including something additional. She doesn't go out like the avadim, but she comes in like them. And the other one is saying only these are acquired in this way, but someone else is not acquired in this way, and that's going to exclude something. So we're going to now say ve'ema otam b'shtar v'lo acher b'shtar. So they say, why don't you say otam, right, is excluding shtar and not, right, and not like we said before that shtar is included. To which they say the obvious, which is haktiv lo tetzei avadim. We just already derived that it is b'shtar from that pasuk. But now the obvious question comes out, Umar Ra'ita. But again, it's arbitrary. Why shtar in, chazaka out? It could be the reverse. You could say the pasuk that's including is including chazaka, and the pasuk that's excluding is excluding shtar. So we're back at square one, really. To which they answer, in other words, all we've gotten to right now is one pasuk includes, one pasuk excludes one method, but really we know which one is which, but why? To which they answer, mistabra, it makes sense to say shtar havelei ribuya shekem motzi bebat Yisrael. Shtar is stronger. Why is it stronger? Because when it comes to divorce, how does a woman get out of a marriage? She gets out of a marriage with a document. You can't do chazaka, have her get out of a marriage, like have another man, act as if he's married to her and that would work. That, of course, doesn't work. You can't get out of a marriage in a way of chazaka. So it shows, now, it's not exactly clear what this proves, but some of the commentaries say it shows that this is a stronger type of acquiring. So if you're going to include one and exclude the other, you may as well include the stronger one. It makes sense. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Adrabah, you could say the reverse. There's certain cases where something's hefker, ownerless. If a convert is as if he's born new when they convert. So let's say a whole family converts. The children are not considered the convert's children for purposes of inheritance. So when he dies, he has no heirs, no brothers, no kids. So basically all of his property is ownerless, and whoever picks it up first acquires it. And how do they acquire it? Through chazaka. They don't get a shtar. A shtar has to be two sides, right? Someone has to write it to the other person. The person's dead here. There is no owner. So chazaka has a certain strength because it works by hefker, whereas shtar wouldn't work. To which they say, but these laws of Evet Ivri, or at least Ama Ivriya, are compared to laws of marriage because the woman eventually, right, the idea is that perhaps he'll marry her. So we're going to go with things that appear by Ishut, and there is no chazaka by Ishut, and that's why we get shtar and a chazaka. That's answer number one. Again, this is all according to Rav Chisda's understanding that we're learning it all from the pasuk, lo tetzei ketzei avadim, but she is acquired like avadim. Ibait ema, an alternative, instead of saying shtar is stronger than chazaka because you use it in Ishut, well, you could also say lahachi ahana imacheret. Now, imacheret was the pasuk that Rav Huna used, right? Which was this comparison between her and another woman that he marries. So now they say, even though that's not his pasuk where he learns it from Rav Chisda, but the imacheret does kind of tell you that, well, it's going to be in a Kiddushin kind of way, which means shtar and not chazaka. And that's how we get there. One thing left to deal with in this section, which is, or two things actually, Rav Huna, hai lo tetzei ketzei avadim. It's really one thing that's going to end up being a ping pong. Hai lo tetzei ketzei avadim, my darish be. So let's just summarize. And there's a little chart on the sheet that summarizes it. Rav Huna learns shtar from the pasuk of Ama Ivriya, im acheret yikach lo. Juxtaposition of the two, we're going to say, just like betrothals with shtar, also this woman, and then all other slaves can be acquired by shtar, by a document. Then we had Rav Chisda, who says, no, we can't use that option because, again, he doesn't think that it's like a shtar kiddushin because the father writes the shtar and not the owner. So he would have to say this pasuk, lo tetzei ketzei avadim. She doesn't go out like avadim, but she does come in like avadim. So what is Rav Huna going to do with that pasuk? What do you mean? What does he do with it? The obvious. She doesn't go out if you break her arm, okay, like a regular slave does. To which they say, oh, well, now we're stuck with Rav Chisda. How can you learn two things from one pasuk? And this is a line we keep seeing over and over and over. Rav Chisda in came lichtov kra lo tetzei ketzei avadim. Lo tetzei ke avadim. My ketzei avadim shmami natarti. It just could have said she doesn't go out like avadim. But why did it say she doesn't go out the way avadim go out? That was to teach you the additional, and they come in like they do. Okay, but they do come in like avadim, and with that we resolved the issues there. Next, now we're moving on to the Evet Ivri. How does he get his freedom? And this is going to be much simpler. Konet atzmo b'shanim, b'yovel u'b'gever on kesef. Either 6 years, or jubilee year, or he pays his way out and deducts how much he's worked, right? If he worked for 6 years, if he worked for 4 years, then he pays 2 years worth, right? Whatever's left. Konet atzmo b'shanim, dechtiv, shesh shanim yavodu b'shvi'it. Okay, this says explicitly in the text. He says he worked for 6 years, and on the 7th year he goes free. That's pretty clear. B'yovel dechtiv ad shnat yovel yavod imach. It says until the jubilee year he works for you. That's pretty clear. B'gera on kesef, Amar Chizkiah, we've already seen this a few times. Amar Kra vehefda melamed shemigarei pidyona v'yotza. Right? She gets redeemed. Again, we're going to learn that Ama Ivriya, and from there you can get to all the others. From here we learn. Again, the subject being him, well, what does he do? He's not active. The master, what he's active is he deducts the price. Okay, he deducts the money that she worked and therefore only charges her whatever's left if she buys herself out. Tana. Now, so our Mishnah listed 3 ways they get out, but a Braita says something a little bit different. V'konet atzmo b'kesef with money, ubeshava kesef, or something that's worth money. Okay, that's basically similar to gera on kesef. It's no different, just worded differently. Ubeshtar, but adds shtar. And I have to deal with what is the shtar. Bishlama kesef, so the kesef we understand in that brayta dichtimi kesef miknato. That was by the Gentile. It said, you buy yourself out with money. Shve kesef nami yashiv gulato. That's in the same pasuk. Kesef miknato yashiv gulato. Those words are really unnecessary. So they say, I must be saying, yashiv gulato amar rachmana lerabot shve kesef kekesef. Either kesef or something that's worth kesef. Ha'ela ha'ishtar hechidami. But what kind of shtar are we talking about? So let's talk about what the possibilities are. If you're going to say, the slave can get out by saying, I'm giving you an IOU. Let's say I cost $1,000. I'm giving you an IOU for $1,000. And so let me go free. And here's an IOU of $1,000. That's basically money. It's just, the document is worth money. It's like giving a check, right? A post-dated check. That's giving money. So that's not shtar. So, ela shichur, shtar lamali. But if you're saying it's a get shichur, now remember, what did we learn by slaves? We had this whole section in Gittin about Canaanite slaves. They need a shtar shichur to say you are freed. And we compared it to a get, right? We even called it a get shichur. So shtar lamali, you don't need a shtar in this case. What is an eved ivri? It's a financial thing. Now, financial thing, he owes money, or he's poor and he sells himself for money. And in essence, to get out, he needs to just pay money. So if the guy just wants to free him, even though he didn't give him the money, he doesn't need to write a shtar shichur. All he needs to go is in front of two witnesses or go in front of a court and say, you can go free. I forgive you the fact that you stole my money and never paid it back, or you got poor and you sold yourself. I'm happy to just let you go. He doesn't need a shtar. So why is there a shtar? So Amar Rava, Zot omeret, Eved ivri gufo kanoi, v'arav shemachal geruno en geruno machu. Normally money, you could just be mochel and say, you know what, you owe me this money, but I don't care. This, obviously, you can't be mochel. Now, why is this? Because his body is acquired by you. Now, this is a problematic statement because we've already made a lot of distinctions between Eved Knani is part of your household. You own him. He becomes like a possession of yours. But an Eved Ivri is not like that. So how could you possibly say this? This Gemara is very strange. But what they're saying is basically his body is acquired by you. Since it's his body and not just a financial thing, you can't just say, oh, I don't care. You have to give him a get shichur. So some commentaries say, what does it mean his body is acquired if it's not really? Well, number one, they say it's like a tree you sell for its fruits. Not that the tree is still mine, but I'm giving you the rights to the fruits. So that's like the Eved Ivri. His body is sold to you, is acquired by you to the extent that you have all the rights to his produce. Everything he produces is yours. That's one way of looking at it. The Ramban says something fascinating in a different way. He says, no, when you're in Eved Ivri, you're allowed to be with the Shifcha Knani. Remember, that was the whole thing. And in fact, your husband, the master can force him, which is a crazy thing to think about. But putting that aside, when you leave, you're forbidden to the Shifcha Knani. This is similar to what we talked about with the Eved Ivri. Why do you need a shtar shichur? Remember, we had all those sugyot. You need a shtar shichur to remove, right, or to basically shift his marital ability to marry, right? Once he's freed, the Eved Knani, he becomes Jewish, and then he can only marry a Jewish woman. Before that, he can only be with a Shifcha Knani. He can only marry a Shifcha Knani. In this case, it's not the same thing, but it's similar in the sense that he's allowed to be with the Shifcha Knani when he's a slave, but as soon as he's freed, he's not. So there's an Isser v'heter, as we call it, thing going on. It's not just monetary, and that's how the Ramban understands this. There's something else that requires a get shichur. It doesn't fit in perfectly with the words, but it makes a lot more sense in terms of other sugyot. We saw that his body is not acquired by you. Okay, moving on. So that was, again, the Mishnah, Shanim, Yovel, Gera, On Kesef, that's how he gets his freedom. And then we have this extra one mentioned in this Braita, which we just dealt with, about also by a shtar, a document. And then we had to just figure out what is this document. And then they said, well, really his body is acquired by you, however we understand. Now we're moving to the next line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah then says, Yitera alav amay that she has one other way she leaves in addition to an Eved Ivri, which is she leaves b'simanim. As soon as she reaches age of puberty, 12 years plus hairs, 2 pubic hairs, she goes free immediately. Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is going to take us till the end of the daf, really, or almost the end. Ama Ivriya konat atzma bebitat ha'av mereshut adon mikav hachomer. In Ama Ivriya, also acquires herself. Now, the problem is going to be, why didn't it say this in the Mishnah? If her father dies. This is kind of interesting. I was thinking about it. Often you have like a life insurance policy with your mortgage. If you die, your mortgage dissipates, right? You don't owe the money anymore. It's like a life insurance kind of policy. So here also, if the father who sold you, because he didn't have money, he dies, she goes free. Okay, it's kind of like that, right? That it was all because of a debt he had, or he couldn't afford life. Once he dies, right, she gets to go free. That's the way I view it. I don't know if that's the way it's really viewed, but it was a way to kind of associate it with things we know to be. So that's what Reish Lakish says. So I'm just going to read it in the words, because it's a confusing sentence. It really should be read like this. She acquires herself mereshut adon, from the master's possession, meaning she gets released from the master if her father dies. How do we get this? From a kal vachomer. It makes a kal vachomer argument. Remember later in the daf, because we're going to get back to it, this kal vachomer argument. No. Okay, now we have to get all sorts of other things here. A woman, before she's not sold to be a slave, a regular woman, okay, or girl, is in her father's domain until she gets married, basically. That means her father has rights to, right? He feeds her and takes care of her. She gives all her salary to him. Anything she finds on the street goes to him, all sorts of laws. What happens when she hits the age of puberty? Does that change? No. Okay, that's what it means. Ein simanim, right? It doesn't change her status of regards her father. And yet, what do we know from our Mishnah? But yet it does release her from this bondage of the slavery. So now, even though the father gets all of her stuff, if he dies, his heirs do not get it. Okay, so her brothers don't start getting all of her stuff. Okay, that seems good, right? You would think, oh, that's really a little bit unfair. So once he dies, it releases her. So wouldn't you think that if death releases her when simanim don't, and death releases her from the father, right, from the father's heirs having possession, so wouldn't you think that if simanim release her from the adon, then also the death of the father should release her from the adon? To which then, right? So even though they're not really connected, it is a kal vachomer argument. Now we're going to have, it's going to take us for a lot into the daf, 3 questions against this. The first obvious question, Meitive Rav Hoshaya. Rav Hoshaya asked the first question. Look at our Mishnah. She's got one more way she gets out. She leaves if she hits puberty, has signs of puberty. Doesn't say, if the father's death should release her, and that's only her, it obviously doesn't apply to an Eved Ivri, it should have listed it in the Mishnah. To which, whenever we have this kind of question, the first answer is, Tana Bashir. Tana just left it out. But if you're going to say the Tana left it out, right, for no good reason, you have to say that the Tana left out more than one thing. If you only leave out one thing, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to include the list of everything and leave off one thing, it makes no sense. If you're going to leave off a few things, then we can at least accept it. So we have to find, is there something else left off the list? So they say, my shiur da shiur, what else is left off? Shiur mitata adon. If the master dies, to which they say, imishu mitata adon, lav shiurahu. That wasn't left out of the Mishnah. Why? The end of the Mishnah, you might not remember this, but the end of the Mishnah said, one who got his ears pierced, meaning, right, his ear pierced in order to stay with the master, he leaves biyovel or b'mitata adon. He leaves if the master dies. Okay, if you said, I like living here and I want to stay longer, and you get your ear pierced and you stay, right, only for a man, because it's not true for a woman, right, that law doesn't apply, she can't do that. If you do that, you leave as soon as your master dies. So this was all to say added things that don't exist in any of the other cases. So it is actually in the Mishnah, so you can't say that was left out as well. So answer number 1 didn't work. So then really, if Reish Lakish is right, it should have said the death of the father, to which they answer a second answer. The Mishnah set up only things that we know when they end, like 6 years. We can count 6 years. Jubilee, we can count the Jubilee. But we can't count when the father's going to die. We have no idea when the father's going to die. That's an unknown. Didn't list unknown things, to which they say, well, there are unknown things in the Mishnah. right? There's no limit, not just unknown. It's just there's no limit, right? It's limitless. You have no, it could be 100 years, could be 50 years, could be 10 years. So simanim also, we don't know exactly when they're going to happen. There's no exact time. Amar Rav Safra, going now to Amabet, finally. These are things that have they have no upper limit, meaning we don't know at what age they will actually happen, but there is a minimum age. There is a clear-cut minimum age. Okay, maybe machloket about what clear-cut means, but here we're going to see, Titania, as it says in a Braita, specifically they're talking about boys here. Ben tesha shanim, they're just using as an example to show that there is some limit. Ben tesha shanim shevi shtei savot, if you're 9 and you have two hairs, if you're a man, shuma, we just view that as a mole. That's not simanim, right? Sometimes you have hairs that grow out of a mole. Mi ben tesha b'yom echad, mi ben tesha shanim b'yom echad, if you're 9 in a day, ad ben yud bet shana b'yom echad, until you're 12 in a day, ve'odambo, and they remain on you, they don't fall out, and they remain on you, or I would say like this, even if they remain on you when you're still 12, like let's say you had them when you were 9 and then they stayed on you till you were 12, shuma. We're still going to call that a mole. Rabbi Yehuda Omer sima. Specifically in that case, he's going to say no. Already 9, we can count you as if you have 2 hairs and they stay on until you're 12, we can, right, on your 12th birthday, they're still there, we can say that was puberty. Ben Yud Gimel Shana B'Yom Echad Divrei Kol Siman. 13 and a day already, no matter what, you have hairs, we call that a siman. So what do you see here? There's a minimum clear-cut starting point. Okay, again, clear-cut maybe based on a machloket, but there is clear-cut. So basically, what we're saying here, and our answer is, mitad ha'av isn't mentioned there because there's no date at all. Whereas at least simanim have some sort of date, at least according to Rav Safra, right? Or that's Rav Safra's answer. Mativ Rav Sheshet. Question number 2. So question was, why wasn't it in the Mishnah? Because it wasn't talking about cases that don't have a clear-cut date or associated with it. Mativ Rav Sheshet. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Arba'a manikim lehem. Shlosha b'ish, shlosha b'isha. Okay, this is very confusing math. It sounds, but it's not at all. There's 4 who get gifts. 3 cases for a man and 3 cases for a woman. Okay, you would think 4 would be 2 and 2, but 2 are going to overlap in both. Okay, what are they? Rashi, toward the end of Rashi, is going to tell us right now what the Gemara thinks the four cases are. Kasal kadata hashta, which toward the end of that Rashi, shehen hayotze b'shesh shanim. Okay, so if you leave after 6 years, you get this gift at the end, what we call kind of severance pay. You get this gift. If you left after 6 years, whether you're a man or a woman, so that's going to go, one is going to go on both sides. Next one is yovel, that also goes for man and woman. Next 2 are going to be only in the man or only the woman. Nirtza, which is only for a man because women don't do that. Sheyotze b'mitat adom. If the master dies, then he goes free. We saw that in the Mishnah. Simanim de amai vriya. And in amai vriya goes out in simanim. That also we saw in the Mishnah. So all those cases where they leave on those for those reasons, which is 3 for him, 3 for her, again, 2 overlap in both, they get that gift. You can't say 4 for a woman or 4 for a man, because simanim don't apply to the men. They don't go out with simanim. And ritzia, there is no such thing as ritzia in a woman, right? We don't pierce her ear. She doesn't get to stay past the 6 years. Now, what does this have to do with it? Well, im ita minami mitara, right? There would be 4 for the woman. If she really leaves, like Reish Lakish says, when the father dies, that should have been listed here. It's the exact same question. It's just using a different source and saying, this is not on the list. So we're going to go through the same 2 possibilities as before. If you're going to say again, maybe they just left it out. You can't possibly say that here because he gave a number. When he gives a number, it means that's a finite number. We don't have ones missing. If you're going to say it's all about things that have a limit, right, a clear date associated with them, simanim are on the list and they are ein lem kitzbah, although we did say they did, which is what they're going to say now. Maybe you're going to say they have a lower limit, right, minimum age, and then they could be on this list, right? Now, it didn't say this inside, and that's going to be the important part, but it did say there's obviously something that's true for a nirtza. Now, if you're going to go to what's unique about a nirtza, we're going to go to our Mishnah. What does it say? When the master dies, he leaves. Now, the master dying is just like the father dying. We have no idea when that will be. De'en lahem kitzba v'katane, and yet it appears, so that's not a good answer here. To which they say, oh, wait, no. You misunderstood the Braita. Mitat adon nami lo katane. It didn't mean when it talked about the nirtza that there's one extra one by the man that's not by the woman. We assumed they were talking about when the master died, but it never said that in the Braita. So that's not the one on the list. And then we can go back to our answer. It just didn't say things that have no limit. Ela arba'a ma'inihu. So what are the four? Shanim v'yovel v'yovel shel ritzia. The jubilee year of the one who is nirtza is a unique halacha, because you might have thought, right, he really is supposed to work forever. We even saw that avadol olam, but there's a unique law that he also goes free in the jubilee year, and that's the fourth one that's on the list. And then everything is clear limit, and that answers our question just like the previous. Okay, so and now they're going to further prove this. Hachinami mistabra de katane seifa can further prove that it's talking about Yovel and not about the mitah of the master. Now, being ita, if you were going to add this mitah adon, it says there's only 3 in the men and 3 in the women. Now, if you're going to add mitah adon, the master dies. We also said that for the woman, if she's in a ma'avriya and the master dies, she also goes free. So there would be 4. So obviously, this is the right answer, that they just didn't include death of anyone because that's just an unknown, and that wasn't the type of things that were mentioned in this source. So same type of answer as before. Third question against Reish Lakish. Matav Rav Amar, ve'elu ma'anikim lehem. These are people who get gifts. It's very similar. But here it's going to say explicitly mitata adon, and then we're really going to have a problem. Hayotze b'shanim u'b'yovel, right? 6 years, jubilee year, u'b'mitata adon. V'ama ivriya b'simanim. V'im ita nitnenami mitata av. If you're going to say mitata adon, you may as well say mitata av. And now we're going to go through all the others and reject them, the same 2 we've been talking about. B'chite matana v'shir, if you left out, they just left one out. Ha'elu katane, it says these are means these and no others. If we're going to say, like we did with the others, it really only tells things that are clear cut. But simanim don't. Rav Safra, we're just repeating. If you're going to say like Rav Safra, at least it has a lower limit, right? A minimum age. Still, you have mitad adon here, which you can't say it's not there. It says it explicitly, which we tried to do in the last one. Tiyuvta de Reish Lakish tiyuvta. So really, we end up with a question against Reish Lakish. Now, while we took this as a question against Reish Lakish, we're now going to say, V'ha Reish Lakish, we're now going to question the Tana from Reish Lakish, which is a weird way of doing things. Because usually we question Emoraim from Tanaim. Now we're going to question this Tana from what Reish Lakish says. V'ha Reish Lakish kavachomer amar, as if like kavachomer is the end-all be-all of everything. But he had a good logical kavachomer. So how could the Tana not think that she goes out when the master dies, based on the kavachomer of, remember, simanim don't release her from the father, and they release her from the master. So if she's released from the father at his death, she should be released from the master at the father's death as well. So they say, no, don't worry about that kavachomer pricha. You can knock out that kavachomer. Mishum de'ikala mifrach. You could say, ma simanim shenishtane haguf. Tomar mitan ak sheken lo nishtane haguf. Simanim are unique. You can't learn from there too, the death of the father, because the death of the father has nothing to do with her body, right? It's his body. It just happens to be her father. But in Simanim, her body changes. That's why she gets released from the master. But the father's death has nothing to do with her. So therefore, it maybe wouldn't necessarily release her. And therefore, the Tana doesn't think that releases her, even though Reish Lakish thought it did. So basically, we question the Tana based on Reish Lakish's kavachomer. We say, no, the kavachomer is actually weak. Now we're going to bring a proof for Reish Lakish. Tanechad, one Braita says, Enek Eved Ivri Latzmo. Okay, we'll get back to this in a minute, but the gift of the Eved Ivri goes to him. Who else would it go to? That's going to be the Gemara's question later, obviously. Ve'enek Amay B'riya Latzma. The woman gets her own severance pay also, right? This is the gift you get when you're released. She gets it. V'tani Idach, a different Braita says, Enek Amay B'riya U'Metziata La'aviyah. Ve'en L'Rabah L'Schar B'Tala B'Ilvad. When you're an Amayvriya, if you get released and you get that gift, your father gets it. And while you're a slave and you find something on the street, your father gets that as well. And going back to what we talked about before about the father's rights to his daughter's stuff. All he gets, the master, is if when you found an item, you had to go bring it home and you didn't work for that hour, he gets that hour back in payment. That's a side point. Okay, that's all they get. So my love, had enough. Now we have this contradiction. Does she get it or does her father get it? How do we resolve this contradiction? My love, had enough. If she went out because she became of age, then then it goes to the father, because the father still gets her stuff after simanim. But if he died, then the father doesn't get her stuff anymore. His heirs don't get it. Then she gets it herself. So if she left on account of him dying, then she would get it herself. What do you see here? She leaves on account of him dying. But the Gemara rejects this proof and that would prove Reish Lakish. But they say, no. Both cases she got out b'simanim. It's just a matter, is the father still alive or not? It has nothing to do with, right? It's a matter of, it's not that the father's death released her. Her simanim released her. It's just, if her father happens to still be alive, he'll get it. If he's not alive, she gets it. And then this has nothing to do with Reish Lakish. Now we just go back to deal with that brother, the Eved Ivri thing. Why do they have to tell us that she gets it herself if the father died? Wouldn't it be obvious? No, because it's to say, we want you to know it doesn't go to the brothers. And where do we get that from? Remember, the slaves get passed on, Gentile slaves get passed on to the children. But that teaches you that slaves get passed on, but rights of a daughter do not get passed on to the brothers. This is where we learn this law from, and that's why the Brighton needed to tell you, because it's a special drasha. But the fact that an Eved Ivri gets his own ma'anak, who else would get it? If I'm a grown man and I sell myself to be a slave and I go free, of course I'm going to get it. Who else would get it? Why is the Brighton telling us? So we're going to have two possible answers, and with that, we'll finish for today. Ela Leman. So, right, Ela Leman is like, who else would get it? Amar Yosef, Yud Keret Kachazina Hachi. This is, in English, they say you made a mountain out of a molehill. Okay, that's the English phrase. You took a yud and you turned it into a city. In other words, the Tana just took a yud and made a big deal out of it. Okay, he didn't really need to. It was something very obvious, but he told you anyway. Right? Maybe in other words, you could really say he was just doing it. I mean, they could have said this. They didn't say this to compare it to the Amai V'liya. You know, it was used as a foil. But what they're saying is you really didn't need it. This goes according to Tutai, a name we don't usually see. Titania Tutai Omer, it's somebody's name. Tutai said, lo v'lo l'ba'al chovo. What it's saying is, he gets his gift, and you can't give it to someone he owes money to. Remember, we learned this, Shebuda de Rabbi Natan. Normally, you could pay, but in this case, there's a special drasha, lo v'lo l'ba'al chovo. That's why the Braita told you, because he always gets it no matter what, even if he owes money to someone. You can't give it, the owner can't give it directly to that person. Okay, we'll stop here, and we're going to go back more in depth then into this thing about giving the gifts. So quick review of today's talk. We started with this machloket, Rabbi Yossi Glili, Rabbi Akiva versus Chachamim, who we then said is Rebbe, about whether when a slave is redeemed from a Gentile owner, is there a possibility, depending on, there's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Glili who disagree, that he'll be enslaved by the person who bought him, or does he go free according to the rabbis? No matter what, he goes free. Then we went into, how do we know an Eved Ivri is acquired by shtar? We brought two different proofs. There were two tracks, the Rav Huna track or the Rav Chisda track, depending on whether you think the master writes the document or the father writes the document. And then can we compare it to Kiddushin or not? And if not, then we need to learn from somewhere else. Then we did, how does he get free, the Eved Ivri? Shanim, Yovel, Gera, and Kesef. We showed that on the Psukim. That was very easy. Then we had shtar there also in a Braita. And then we had to say, what kind of shtar are we talking about? He gave an answer there. Then we said, even when the father dies, even though it didn't say so in the Mishnah, to which we said, why didn't it say so in the Mishnah? And why didn't it say in another two tannatic sources? Two of them we basically answered, that's something without any limit. Those type answers weren't given in those type cases weren't given in the Mishnah or in the Braita. But you can't say that in the third case because it did talk about the death of the master. So the third one was really a difficulty. And then we asked, why didn't the Tana hold like Reish Lakish and buy his Kavachomer? And we said, no, because the Kavachomer had a problem. And then we brought a potential proof for Reish Lakish, a resolution of two contradictory sources, which we assumed had to do with her leaving when the father died, to which we said, no. It's just that the father happens to be dead, but not that was what caused her release. And that's basically what we got up to. We will pick up with the gift thing and the Braita that we quoted before, going a little bit more in depth starting in tomorrow. Hopefully we'll catch up soon. Wishing everybody a great day, and we'll meet up tomorrow.